what prompts this outreach is to discuss what the Department of Fish and Wildlife is doing with the final environmental impact report. How are we going to be dealing with this? It was released despite Fish and Wildlife's own admission of major errors in their flood capacity engineering plans and specs that had to do with the channel itself. And the federal counterpart for the environmental impact statement, the Army Corp of Engineers permitting, relies upon accurate fish and wildlife data for the DEIR, the FEIR. Therefore, the federal review will not be released anytime soon. According to our sources at the Corps, Fish and Game has to fix its errors, which they figure will take about a year, and then it'll take about another year for the Army Corps to be able to review that. However, continue to work on these issues and don't take anything for granted, because obviously it could be certified at any time, and we are prepared to litigate should that happen and feel that the document is thoroughly inadequate. We continue to push for a true restoration based on what was promised to the public and stakeholders, and based upon the documented history and science of the site, which is that BALLONA is a predominantly seasonal freshwater wetland. And yet, the entire premise of the EIR that was created by the Santa Monica Bay Restoration Commission and the California Coastal Conservancy, who contracted to have the EIR studies done, was all based upon a premise of restoring the ebb and flow of the saltwater to BALLONA, which is a thoroughly inadequate and inaccurate assessment of what BALLONA is, and it all generates actually from the 1999 timeframe when the Coastal Commission was involved with the site and their lawsuit that was settled post-haste, and they didn't do the environmental study of the site and simply called it a salt marsh. And the Army Corps was involved in that, Fish and Wildlife was involved in that, so it is rather come down through the years with this false premise that Travis Longcore and others have since done the studies paid for with public bond money to show what the true history of BALLONA is, which is predominantly a seasonal freshwater wetland. One of the main tenets of this restoring the ebb and flow of water to BALLONA is the idea that BALLONA is dying because it is what? It is drying out. And yet, it is not drying out. It is having all of its water diverted, drained, and so on, which we'll also get into here. I just wanted to also show you with the Friends of BALLONA flyer that says 30 years ago, we saved BALLONA from development. Well, that wasn't, you know, we're glad that they worked on trying to save BALLONA at the time, but the yellow area in the picture is actually the area that they saved, which is now, as the blue area shows, where we have the freshwater marsh, which is actually the catch basin for Playa Vista's runoff. And it was a good habitat area that was very controversial at even having them put their catch basin on the side of the land that ultimately was saved. And as you can see, those dotted areas down there, that was all intended to remain as a park area. And the area to the north of Jefferson or Culver right there was slated for development also, which was stopped after Building and Safety said because of the gas issues of SoCal Gas, you cannot build residential, anything residential west of Lincoln Boulevard. They considered it to be too dangerous, which was ultimately what Playa Vista saw and went to Gray Davis, and they started working to raise bond money to sell the land, which is what it says in the copy there pretty much. The Friends of BALLONA make this claim that there are groups that oppose any restoration that could bring back BALLONA. That's the most absurd thing. Obviously, we would all like to see BALLONA restored, but what we would like to see is the restoration of water that is being drained. Grassroots Coalition has had lawsuits with Fish and Wildlife and Playa Vista for illegal drains on the site. We get to later slides, I'll show you where they are dewatering and diverting water away from Ballona. But as you can see in the 1952 Spence photographs here, this is all fresh water. This is all fresh water ponding up. And you can see that the roadways are still there. And you can see the channel going out. The flood control works. But we do pond up with this water. And now all of this water, and as you see on the east side of Lincoln Boulevard, that's where Playa Vista is now. So consider that when I show you what we call the spider maps is coming up here. It's going to be spider maps because they're fingers pointing to all the pumps underneath all these buildings at Playa Vista that they pump out the groundwater and send it to the sanitary sewer, literally throwing it away. So keep all this water in mind. And the EIR for Ballona failed to include any freshwater hydrology studies of Ballona. And they provide no freshwater restoration alternative. So what is truly behind the, turning this into a saltwater bay? And we believe there's money to be made for corporate entities. And this is one of the older shots showing the oil wells down there. This is before the channel was there. And this shows, if you look up to the top where the little circle is, you can see that was the opening for Ballona Channel. It never came out to the ocean. Shelley Luce was just commenting in something that the Land Trust put out, that they have an audio of her comments discussing how the channel just totally took away the river outlet that went to the ocean. Well, as we know from the studies done by Travis and others, Travis Longcore, it didn't happen that way. These waters never broke through to the ocean but for extreme storm years. And it would sand up again and become a predominantly freshwater area. And we can see here that the Corps realized that the end of the channel at this point in time was taking the fresh water from inland and dumping it into what they knew was a freshwater wetland. But also key here is notice how the channel, go up with it, Richard, and you can see it zigzag. That zigzag, because it was zigzagging, overflowed because it could not move out fast enough. So it flooded throughout this whole area. And the Corps was sued, others were sued, and they ultimately straightened that channel to what it is today to have it cut through directly out to the ocean. So as the inland built up with all the hardscaping, all that runoff would move quickly through the channel out to the ocean. And it has worked ever since. Also, I wanted you to note how narrow the beach is through here. See that little spit that's there? Well, the city later on got into a mode of creating and enhancing the beach all along Santa Monica Bay. And we'll see that later. And also keep in mind that opening to that little lagoon area is a man-made opening. But for people dredging that out, it would not stay open. Okay. Oh, and by the way, if you look up there at the corner of Lincoln and Jefferson there, that's University City Syndicate. And that's, you'll see also in some later slides, that it is leaking over top that with oil field gases now. And Playa Vista was the last operator to abandon that. And we're working to see that re-abandoned properly now. And here's more freshwater ponding all across Area A. This is, when you have a typical year, this is what happens. Here you have frog eggs. Frog eggs and frogs don't exist in salt water. They don't exist. And there are a lot of us that remember the chorus of frogs that we also have documented that exists throughout this area that we would like to see remain. Now, these are the aquifers that underlie all of Ballona and to the east. You can see where the Charnock Fault is. You can see where the Pacific Ocean is. And Ballona's aquifers are classified as potential drinking water by the State Water Board. And the laws down below, the Porter-Cologne Groundwater Protection Act, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, all disallow harm to the groundwater volumes and quality. And Porter-Cologne in particular, you are not even allowed to put in like contamination. You have to clean it before you can add it there. And even 8888, Department of Water Resources, which is from the 60s, disallows the wasting of water. And this is all key because this water has been totally eliminated in the EIR. I mean, it's just simply not discussed. And so when you think of allowing that saltwater intrusion in and the contamination of these aquifers, we believe it is, I don't know how they're getting away with even promoting this idea, except that if you don't tell anyone that something could happen, it never gets addressed. Well, we're telling people, look, these are freshwater aquifers underneath here. And SoCalGas, in a litigation for Prop 65, which are chemicals that cause birth defects and cancer, lost in a lawsuit based on the documentation from Grassroots Coalition, Public Utilities Commission investigation and litigation against SoCalGas, which ended roughly 2007-8. But as a result of that, we had key areas that we knew they were contaminating. And in that time frame, a Prop 65 lawsuit was done, and SoCalGas lost. And as a result of that lawsuit, SoCalGas in the settlement agreement says, if the water quality changes for this area, we will no longer have to remediate it to a drinking water standard. So this Prop 65 lawsuit required the remediation to a drinking water standard. And do we want to let them off the hook for keeping this water clean? I think not. So these are all issues that we are trying to raise and bring up, and we can go on to the next slide. But these are our aquifers, and the Silverado is the major drinking water aquifer for the city, which is the lowest one that's in there. And then we have the Ballona aquifer above that, and then the 50-foot gravel there, and so on. And in the EIR for the Playa Vista site, it cites that the groundwater is at or near the surface. So we know it's something that we have to deal with. Here is something that John Tommy actually created for me to show the volumes of water that we have from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, their permits, and don't confuse this water with, well, we'll get to that, but this water that the water board is dealing with is the old Howard Hughes site contamination. That has to be brought to the surface, cleansed, and this is the volume of water that can be used from that and sent to Ballona, just simply across the street and sent into Ballona, which would give you ½ inch of water per day for this entire area of blue that you see. This slide, all those lines point to buildings, and this is for phase 2 in the middle. Go to the next slide. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, and here's phase 1. And all of those lines, again, those are just addresses written in there, but all of those spots are areas where they pump the groundwater out. This is clean groundwater. And this clean groundwater, contrary to Playa Vista's own mitigation measures, has gotten approval to send it into the sanitary sewer system, which we believe is a total waste of this water. They are harming Ballona by diverting all of this water away from Ballona. We already know that the illegal drains that are over in the area that Richard's circling right now, that the Coastal Commission considered that harmful to Ballona's hydrology. Well, the pumping of water on Playa Vista is far greater than what's going down those drains. So it's harmful on the left, it's harmful on the right, and what they are doing is just walling off the water. And all of this is important also because we have, Ballona is public trust land, and you are not allowed to harm it. We know from the Mono Lake lawsuit with Audubon that they won, that the water being diverted away from Mono Lake, they had to stop levels that would be harming Mono Lake. Similarly, we need to stop those levels of water from not reaching Ballona that are harming Ballona. And Waterkeeper just won a lawsuit on waste. That NPDES permits, which are National Pollution Discharge Permits, so that you can send it either to the sanitary sewer or into the Ballona Channel, they won a lawsuit citing the Water Board was allowing all of this clean water to be wasted through these NPDES permits by being dumped either into the ocean or into the sanitary sewer system. Well, the very same thing is happening here, and we're working to see it stop. And here we get into the actual drainage that was pretty easy to see, although Playa Vista and CDFW and the Bay Foundation never mentioned this in their EIR. They didn't tell us all this water that you're seeing ponding up was being diverted away. The picture in the middle, you can see it draining down through one of the illegal drains. On the 122.17 upper right, that's during a rain event that it ponded over, had enough water to pond over. And the very next day, right below it, the main drain opened into the channel and flushed all of that water out into the channel, literally throwing it all away. And you can see in the map up here, there are the two drains that do that, and this is the freshwater marsh area. And you can see where that main drain is, that is an approved drain. But come on, folks, this is, 2020. Let's talk about these issues, Coastal Commission. You approved this drain back in 1990, and there was no concept at that time, even from the Army Corps of Engineers, who also approved this stuff. They believed the water that was being sent into the freshwater marsh, which, by the way, is the Water Board's cleansing of the Howard Hughes contamination. They send that water into the freshwater marsh, but that marsh has a clay liner so that it doesn't percolate down. Ultimately, this water, it's designed to go over into the Ballona through right there, just to the left of where you are, Richard, just the left, all along there. It's supposed to flush out into Ballona and nurture Ballona. But instead, for the most part, it is simply sent through that main drain out into the channel. Now, who has control of that? Can anybody guess? It's Playa Vista, because they have what's called the Ballona Conservancy, that Fish and Wildlife claims to be on the board, and yet it is a totally private Playa Vista entity. And it was created as a .org, actually, as though it's helping the public. Well, I don't see it helping the public's interests by throwing away all this water that nurtures Ballona. I believe that this is a gifting of public funds for having created this and then just totally wasting the water that's in there and throwing it out into the ocean, which actually some of that water from the Water Board is also sent into the sanitary sewer. It fluctuates at any given time. And it's all a waste of Ballona's watershed water that would ordinarily come through here. And certainly during the rainy season, when we have all this fresh water ponding up, the attempt to throw it away and get rid of it is simply egregious and unlawful, and we're fighting it. Anyway, I'm done.